Alright, guys, I think I came up with my new preferred method for what notes I want to have available for DMing. My DM prep notes, if you will. For a long time, I've been going with the good old one sheet of notes. I go through my 1 through 8 steps. I've already talked about this a little bit, but my classic sort of story circle, beginning, middle, end, very standard storytelling stuff that I use for as like a formula for how I generally want my sessions to flow. But I have added in a second page of paper, my new DM prep notes. I've moved from one sheet of loose leaf paper to including a second sheet of loose leaf paper. Now, if my original one, I can kind of consider the railroad notes, if you will. This is my connected my session notes for the entire party, what I imagine they will all be teaming up to pursue, like the conflicts they're all going to be facing together. And this I also have connect to my sort of grand narrative, and by that I mostly mean like how does this directly involve the players and their relation to the big bad evil guy, if you will. This second sheet of notes is just a big long list of 10 little bullet pointed sentences, maybe like a sentence or two. They each directly relate to a given character. These are each like encounters or specific things that can occur to one character. I've and like affected character personally. I've called these my character beats, and I've given 2 to each player, to each of my like player characters, and it's just an encounter that in some way either pulls in their backstory, brings in something from their backstory, or will force them to confront something about their personality. So each of my players, I force them to all give me short-term ambitions, and I have given that like a mechanical direct effect by giving my players sort of like fate points, inspiration, and 5e, if you will, that they'll gain whenever they accomplish these short-term ambitions. So they have a reason to have reasonably accomplishable short-term ambitions and to try to come up with stuff for that. And so that makes this pretty easy. That's just an easy, at least one for each player character is like personally completing an ambition you desire. And the other ones, I try to like pull in something from their backstory. Alternatively, I've now also, not this one less so, forced my players, but I've given my players like memberships to organizations and factions that have like mechanical effects as well. So, like for example, someone who's a member of a wizard school might now have access to their libraries and records and can research stuff. Kind of like the backgrounds that come in like the features from backgrounds in 5e. So with these organizations, I've given them like a whole mechanical thing too, and each organization has a series of goals, and so those are also like personal sort of encounters and things that can come up. I'm just gonna run through like a few of my favorites here. Like my number one. Now you see Cletus. This is also a little bit of a spoiler, foreshadowing of the next session. Cletus is a dwarf rogue, and he's kind of got an arc going on of following in his honorable footsteps in his family, and him being a somewhat new player to D&D and knowing, oh, I'm a rogue, so I guess I am supposed to go out and steal stuff. So that's how, most of his downtime he's been running around pillaging from merchants and nobles and the likes. So I'm going to give him a little bit of a Valjean situation where some innocent dwarf is going to be taken in for like arrested for a crime that Cletus had committed. I honestly do not know how Cletus is going to react, the player playing him. It really could go either ways, but I think this will like definitively set which path he's going on, whether or not he's either going like for that full rogue or if he's going for that wants to be redeemed. So we'll see what happens with that. Humdu, he's been jonesing to kill some kobolds. That has been on his ambition list for quite a while now, and he hasn't want to change it because he really hates those kobolds. So I decided I'll throw in here a kobold that was a part of that whole family, that like priesthood of kobolds that he killed back in the one of those dungeons. And so there's going to be like a cool guy with a whole poison gimmick theme that rides a wyvern. So these things, these encounters, if you will, these like character moments, I try to, or my intention is to design them in such a way that they could conceivably be inserted into anything. Like they could show up on, like they could just be random encounters you find in the road or stuff that just goes on in the city, stuff or like in the town that they're currently at, things that like in my projected sort of dungeon session prep line out that I have. If at this point, like if at any point during this session they just decide like screw this, like we're not gonna keep doing this and pursuing this, we're just gonna run off and start doing another thing, and like that's honestly not very uncommon or unlikely that they just decide to not engage with this because they're by no means locked to this. Like if they don't want to go through this, then they don't have to. And sometimes if they don't, now this like secondary paper, my character beats, is something that I always had in my mind, and it was something I was always thinking about in the background of a session. I just decided to actually write it down and have something I can reference during the middle of the session. This way, if they decide to run away, I can just start running through different like character moments and then just try to fill my like 3 to 4 hours that way. And another thing about this is that once you write 1 or 2 per character, you can just like save them if you don't use them, because since these are mostly timeless, like mostly not entirely concretely dependent on what's actively happening in the game, you can save these for future sessions. Like at least for the most part, like obviously sometimes there'll be a thing that now conflicts with what you have written and you'll have to scratch that. But for the most part, if you only use like maybe like a couple of these a session, then that means you'll only have to write a few of these a session. But like the main thing, the number one overarching thing that I probably should have started with as I was writing this, or when I started talking about this, is it's more so it's like main number one practical use is for when I am running them through my railroaded, prepped out, outlined session. Whenever I think there is a perfect moment, like whenever it just seems like it would come up organically and make sense and make a certain situation very tense or more meaningful for a given character or player, that's when I would ideally insert these. That's like my main intended use, is that like as I run through this, figure out, like literally as I'm running the session, when it just pops in my mind, figure out, okay, it would make sense for Humdu to run into this figure from his past in this particular dungeon. Maybe he's a prisoner, what have you. And just really tie these two together, really try to intertwine them to make it feel like that it was intended and to make it feel less improv-y and more prepared, I guess. So, that all having been said in the case, I've not tested this at all. I plan on testing this sometime this week in my next session. I've got very high hopes for this. I think this is really going to level up my session. Oh, actually, there was something else I did want to talk about, and that is what I think to be one of the most, I don't necessarily want to say like under considered challenges of being a DM, but possibly like one of the hardest parts of being a DM, and in before scheduling, but all right. The idea that as a DM, and if you want to like involve your players, now your players, the one thing, now obviously the whole game is like collaborative storytelling, but as for all the players, I think it's very, very easy to sort of get in that like notion, get that idea that, well, I've got control of my character and the DM is sort of the writer, and I'm just gonna like go through to the best of my ability as this character, which is fair, but like you get this sense that like I've got my character, I've got full control over him and everything that happens here. The DM has the world, he has full control over the world. Whereas I think the thing that separates the good players from the great, again, is when that player has that understanding of the world, not in like its history or its lore, but in that understanding of like the theme, the tone of the world, and that you can like just make up events that might have occurred, like people that could exist in the world, that the DM will like yes and you with, and like agree, like play along, and like you literally as a player just create lore out of the open because you just said that, oh, this dark elf that we just ran across on the road, why, of course I know him, he was my brother at the orphanage. Not whatever, but like that would probably be an example of a not so great connection. But as long as you're throwing stuff out there, then your DM will pick up with what he's a fan of, and then the stuff that he doesn't, so like he'll sort of ignore and drop off. But anyways, as a DM, you've sort of got a reverse of that situation going on, where instead of like to truly engage, try to just like add stuff, just make stuff up to the world and to the like the setting, I suppose. As a DM, the challenge for you, like obviously you've got the full control over the world, you can make that whatever you want, but when you start affecting your players' backstories, when you tell Brimbazel that, oh, well, this is your brother that you betrayed 13 years ago, and then when Brimbazel's player says like, what, but that's not my character, my character would literally never betray someone like that, like that doesn't make sense, then like you're just making like, why are you trying to make my character into something that I don't want him to be? So you've got to be careful. Like as a DM, you have to have a very, very, if you want to improv and like bring stuff to the next level and make the collaborative storytelling actually collaborative, your job is to have a very good understanding of your players' characters and to understand what they want from their characters, and to understand what things will be like entertaining that they will enjoy. And I think a lot of players say this, that they believe this in theory, and I think a lot of, basically all DMs will say this genuinely, but that they like player characters being dynamic and complex and changing and having, evolving and growing as people, either from their past or into the future. But I find a lot of players don't I think almost every single player will say that they like that, and that is what they aspire for with their character, that they have a very complex and dynamic growing arc, but I find that like not as many players in practice actually want that. That a lot of them will they've got their set things that they believe their character to be in their mind, like, oh, my character is either honorable, or my character is either, he is this personality trait, and like that is who he is, and I don't want things that are gonna make me not have to, like, to change it from that. Like, I don't want him to have been something else. I don't want him to be something else. Like, I want him to be this guy, and like, which, fair enough. It can be difficult to see where you think that might be going in the future, or to like, you when you're a player, you've got control over this one thing, and when just forces outside of your control start manipulating your one thing, you start to feel like you don't have anything. You're like, all right, well, this is just the ultimate example of me watching the DM story, when he just starts changing my character. He just starts adding stuff to my backstory. So, as a player, you have to, both as a player and as a DM, you both have to work together to find that sweet spot of adding stuff that everyone else likes, and not adding stuff that makes people like the thing that they initially created less. Anyways, I think I started to lose where I was going with this, and now I feel less confident about this whole situation. But, whatever. We'll see how it works out.